Welcome to our worship training sessions in Gordon Presbytery. My name is Heather Michelson, and I'm hosting these sessions on behalf of the Mission and Discipleship Committee. Session 4 is entitled Worship Training, Tips for Speaking in Public, and was facilitated by Reverend Rhona Cathcart and recorded on 23rd June 2022. Rhona, who is trained as both an actor and a minister, shares general tips on speaking in public during the first half of our session. The second half of the session contains specific tips for speaking in public as it relates to reading, preaching, and praying in worship. If you would like the handout which corresponded with this session, please be in contact with me through the email below. Thank you for joining us online or in person. May we now open our hearts and minds as we learn together. God bless.
So welcome. Most of you have been here for a few nights or one or two nights already, so you know that I am Rhona, and I am going to be talking to you a little bit and getting you involved in a little bit of public speaking tonight. As I said to those of you who were here last week, according to some survey, it's the top fear that people have speaking in public, above death, or dying is second. So there are apparently more people afraid of getting up and talking in front of others than there are who are afraid of dying. So it's fabulous you're all here. You're clearly all very brave. So just to give you an idea of sort of the structure of this evening, it's very low tech. You'll see we've got no projector, no screen tonight. It's going to be just a chat and some fairly laid-back session. We're going to be giving you a few general tips and pointers about public speaking that might just help give you a bit of confidence, help improve, subtle things that we do, and also some slightly more specific pointers to do with particular aspects of worship, like reading or praying or whatever that might be helpful. And so then, as Heather said, we'll leave some time at the end for questions, although questions about what's going on at the moment are always welcome on the moment. Now, we're going to begin with an actual physical warm-up. Now, I hadn't calculated how warm it was going to be tonight when I decided to do this, so I'll allow you to take this gently. If you have any major physical mobility problems or whatever, feel free to adapt this to whatever level is comfortable with you. So I'm going to encourage people to stand. It's easier for you to sit. You can sit. If not all of your limbs work, use the ones that do, and so forth. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a very simple exercise called rubber chicken. So here's what you have to do for rubber chicken. You're going to shake your right hand 16 times. And then your left hand 16 times. I'll count, don't worry if you lose track. Then your right foot 16 times, then your left foot 16 times. Then you're going to do 8 and 8 and 8 and 8, 4 and 4 and 4 and 4, 2 and 2 and 2 and 2. And then you're going to jump as much as you safely can and shout out rubber chicken at the top of your voice. All right? Very, very straightforward, very easy, very dignified. I thought it was really important to establish a dignified tone at the beginning of our public speaking evening, but I'm sure we can. So anybody who feels comfortable standing, please stand, and we'll just get ready. Okay, are we ready? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Rubber chicken! Fabulous. Well done. I love you all. Please be seated. We're all a little loose and limber now. One of the things that can sometimes prevent people from being comfortable public speaking is a fear of embarrassment. So you have now done that in front of 45 other people, and that may have been caught on the video recording. So it will be, in theory, impossible for you to be embarrassed up front from now on. It's an interesting thing, the confidence involved in public speaking. Something that very few people who know me now believe is that I was a very shy child. I was sort of quite quiet and particularly in unfamiliar circumstances. But I never had too much hesitations, oddly enough, about getting up and standing and speaking in front of people in a play or something like that. And I don't know whether it was just it felt different for whatever reason. I remember when I was about 7, I was taking part in a play which was about a princess and some knights and a dragon. I was cast in the most important part of the play. I was the page. Now, I knew this was the most important part in the play because I had the opening monologue and the closing monologue. I had absolutely nothing in between, but they couldn't start without me and they couldn't finish without me. So I knew I mattered. And the reason I was chosen for that part was because I had a clear carrying voice. I was always told I had a clear carrying voice, and I was always chosen as a narrator for umpteen things. I don't know if that's being the fourth of 5 sisters, so you needed to, sounds like you recognize that. So you needed to be able to speak clearly to be heard, or what it was. But perhaps I had some natural instinct for that. It didn't stop me getting nervous, though, and especially it didn't stop me getting nervous later on in life when asked to get up and do something as myself. I got involved in theatre. I was fine playing a role. I was an actress for a while. I was comfortable with that. I was a writer too, so I could write things for other people to perform. But if I actually had to get up and speak as myself, that felt really vulnerable. And I think when we're getting up and leading worship, we get that feeling of vulnerability because we don't have a character or anything to hide behind. We are there as ourselves. So that vulnerability is one of the things that can make us feel worried. That fear of embarrassment is another thing. Also, as a child, I'm pretty sure I believed it was possible to die of embarrassment. I really thought it could happen, so I tried to avoid it at all costs. So there's that vulnerability. There's that fear of embarrassment. There's the fear of getting it wrong. Yeah, anybody recognize that? Especially sometimes when we're dealing with church stuff, we get this idea that I don't know whether we think God is up there marking our report card or something like that, but often it's the opinions of other people that worry us, and we're afraid that somebody is going to pick us up on it and make us feel again awkward or that we've done a bad thing. And finally, I think people lack confidence in their own voice. We're not all that familiar sometimes with our own voices. And so some of what we're going to do in this first half tonight is just getting familiar and comfortable with our own voices in a way that we might maybe have not thought about. So we're going to be thinking of tips and ideas and things that you can do to help build that confidence. So the first thing, and I know that Paul said this last week, and I think we said it probably every week so far, is be yourself. Use your own voice. There's absolutely no reason for you to adopt any other voice. Some of you, who've grown up in the Northeast or other parts of Scotland may have been of a generation where you were sent to elocution lessons. And part of the job of that was to make you sound English, as in proper English, not as English, but you weren't supposed to sound Doric or you weren't supposed to sound Scots or whatever. You were supposed to speak properly. Well, the way you speak is properly. So you should not be attempting to change that at all. What we're trying to do is enhance, and to enhance it, we're looking at kind of 3 key things, and that's audibility, clarity, and expression. So you can think ACE, the word ACE. Audibility is at the top because, frankly, if people can't hear you, then the rest of it kind of falls away. So one of the most important things is being able to be clearly heard by the people that you're speaking to. Clarity then is important because if you just have volume, but we can't hear the distinction, or the voice is all on one tone, then that's hard. And expression similarly, especially I think for leading worship, because your job isn't just to present something to people, you're wanting to engage people. You're wanting, as Paul said last week, to stir the emotions. It's not about putting on a voice, putting on an expression, but it is about kind of inhabiting the words that you're speaking and being part of that. If you, again, were of a certain generation, you may have been used to BBC presenters all sounding the same, sort of 30, 40 years ago. And that's because they were all speaking what was known as RP, which stands for received pronunciation. And that was the way everybody was supposed to speak. These days, we don't expect that. And in fact, we even discourage it because it's good to hear natural accents, natural tones of voice, and all the performance. So the first thing that we're going to think about, the first step on this, is knowing your own voice and getting familiar with it. One of the ways you can do this is to listen to yourself. Now, to listen to yourself, you have to listen to yourself from outside of yourself, so to speak, because many of you will know this, voices sound different in your head when they're conducted by bone than they do to somebody else when it's conducted by air. Who's ever heard themselves on a recording? Were you horrified, shocked? Yeah. It's the first reaction that most of us have. We listen to ourselves and we go, what? I remember hearing a recording of myself doing part of a service. And what I noticed was during the children's chat, when I was very animated, I swear I hit some notes that only a dog would hear because I was just down there, which, added variety, but it was a little hard on the ears. So listening to yourself is helpful, but it is hard to listen to yourself non-critically. And when you start out, that's important because what you're wanting is to feel comfortable with your voice and to recognize it and to know what is good about it. You might want to watch for regular habits that can be harder to listen to, and that's useful to know. But at the beginning, what you really want to do is you want to think, hey, this is my voice, this is what it sounds like, and this is what's appreciated. Now that is why I have actually asked you to do this wee exercise that we're going to start with the words of encouragement. Now, if you weren't here last week or you didn't get the email today, you may have been behind with that, but that's okay. We've got a workaround for that. So I asked everybody to bring a little piece of something that they like reading. It could be a verse of a poem, it could be a Bible verse, it could be a passage of prose, just anything that's a short chunk of reading. Now, I wondered when it was a bit quieter at the beginning where everybody had got too frightened by that and decided not to come, but clearly that wasn't the case. I'm not going to be asking people to stand up and read it in front of others. What I'd like you to do is at your tables, you're going to have about 5 or 10 minutes, and I'd like you to each read your passage to the people at your table, and they're just going to listen to you. I realize there's going to be background noise, so we'll have to just try and be a little bit careful about that. And after each person reads, what I'd like is for the other people at the table to give some observations or comments in a positive vein. And if you can be specific, that's good. So you might have something like, wow, your voice is really clear. Or I like the warm tone of that. Or I love that little bit of humor that you had there. Or your articulation is really good and crisp. Just whatever you can think of, but just listen thoughtfully to each other's voices after you've read, each one after you've read, and just encourage the others and pay attention. And we're just going to take 5 or 10 minutes to do that. So thanks, folks. I know that hearing may have been a bit of a challenge, but it was really nice to hear the buzz going on. So how did you find doing that? Good, yeah. Did it feel encouraging to have people say something about your voice, about being listened to? I think it really does, and I think sometimes we have to learn to be encouraging, and it's good to find the people who are encouraging, not uncritically or indiscriminately, but people that are there. I mean, some of the things I've written up here that you might have picked up on are things like somebody's voice being clear, warm, articulate, the kind of pace they use, the volume, their conversational style. Were they relaxed, conversational? Were they dramatic? Kind of expression, the musicality of the phrasing. Did anybody notice anything in particular that they were struck by, that somebody said to them or that they said to somebody else? Use of pauses, very important, absolutely, because that is a really important element of any kind of public speaking, is knowing how and when to pause. And it can be very effective when you were reading. Okay, well, that's good, and I'm glad that has hopefully been a little bit of encouragement for everybody. Now, having got that feeling, and I would encourage you to keep finding opportunities to do that, whether it's reading out loud to kids or grandkids who will tell you to do all the voices or whatever. My kids, one of whom, my son James is here tonight, my kids used to say to me that I did all the voices when I was reading, and I was like, no, I don't do voices. And they were like, yes, you do, Mom. Okay. Getting used to the different expression is quite handy. Then the next step, having familiarized yourself with your voice, is to get your voice ready. ready to speak. So there's a few key points, some of which should be fairly obvious, others you might not have thought of. First one, always remember, hydrate. Do you know, he told this all the time, but it really matters. And it's not just having a glass of water up when you're speaking, it's hydrating beforehand as well. Both on a regular basis, because if your voice is dry, it will be tired and it will get strained faster, but also particularly when you know you're going to be speaking. Just make sure that you've had something beforehand and get to know your own voice in terms of that in what dries your throat out. So I've noticed over the last few years, for example, tea sometimes dries my throat out. So I'm actually better to save my morning cuppa. I'll be gasping for the caffeine by the end of the service, but I'm really better to just take water in the morning on a Sunday morning, which is what I usually do. And don't have my cuppa till afterwards. Now, that might not be the case for you, but for me, that's what it is. So become familiar with the things that dry your voice and the things that help it out. The next thing that's important is actually warming up, because the voice is a muscle, or at least it's surrounded by muscles in your vocal cords. And if you want it to be fit and flexible, you need to keep it warmed up. And in order to be warmed up, you need to release the tension. So for another bit of fun, we're going to try a few warm-ups. They're not quite as drastic this time, so don't worry. You don't have to shout out rubber chicken or anything like that. The first thing is just to relax a little bit with some just neck rolls, because if you're carrying tension in your neck, then you are going to find it very hard to speak clearly. So just a few neck rolls back and forth is good for limbering just in general. Then just shoulder shrugs. Shoulder shrugs, get all those, because good posture actually, you know, your parents, your mum or whatever, your granny will have told you this all your life, but good posture actually helps give you a good voice. Stretch, make sure those ribs are opened up. Lean them to one side, lean them to the other. Pretend you're doing a chant in the football stand, you know, that's great. And then just a little shiggly wiggle just to get yourself. So if your body's then a little bit more limber, it's good to just start warming up your voice. So a good way to start is just humming. So start with a hum that feels like a natural, comfortable pitch for you to hum at. So. You might be feeling your lips buzz. Quite a good sign if you're feeling your lips buzz. It means there's resonance and you're relaxed. You want to keep your throat relaxed. Now try as you're humming going up in pitch. So you're like, as high as you can go, and then let it go down. It starts to get breaking up. Okay, so a few hums are good. Lip trills. My 2-year-old granddaughter likes to do this a lot. And other types of things. It'll be, Nana, do this. Nana, do this. So yes, no dignity there, but yeah. Lip trills. And if you then try yawning. Yawning is actually, I know it'll start you yawning for the rest of the night, but if you do a kind of yawn, which opens up the back of your throat, and then sigh out the yawn, so. And you might notice even after you do that your neck feels a little bit longer at the back, and your throat feels a little bit more open, a little bit more relaxed. Doing a little bit of that is helpful before you've got to speak, even if you feel a bit of an idiot wandering around doing this in your house beforehand. It can make it more comfortable, makes your voice last longer, which is good. But all voice depends on breath. And if your breathing is tense, which happens sometimes naturally, sometimes when you're nervous, then you are going to struggle a little bit with projection and clarity. So the next thing we're going to do is breathe. Now, you may think you've been breathing all night long, but we're going to do a little bit more focused breathing. Nothing complicated at all. All we're doing is breathing in through our noses, or in through our, we'll breathe in through the nose to start with for 4. Hold it for a few seconds, and then breathe out for 4. Okay, so breathe in and breathe out. Now put a hand on your chest and a hand on your stomach, and do it again. Okay, so breathe in and breathe out. Now, which bits moved? Did your chest move? Did your belly move? Or both? Both? People, yeah? Okay, I'm going to get you to breathe again. This time, I want you to concentrate on making your belly move. So as you breathe in, you're going to draw the breath down from here, and your stomach is going to go out for the 4 seconds. And as you breathe out again, you're going to push this, just gently pull the stomach back in to push the air out. So you ready? Let's breathe. And out. It's sometimes easier to do sort of with your mouth as you're going out. So in with the nose and out with the mouth, we'll try. So once again, breathe in with your belly. Try this time to keep your chest as still as possible and just breathe with your belly. And again. Okay, now how did that feel for those of you who aren't used to that? We're only doing it a few times. I don't want anybody keeling over because they're hyperventilating. Good relaxed speaking breathing is diaphragm breathing, which means it's coming from low down. And when your lower part of your torso goes out, you're expanding your diaphragm and letting more air in. And then when you bring it in, you're helping to push and support the air out. It's also a more relaxing way to breathe. If you're inclined to feel tense, you might find you're breathing too much from your chest. You're doing this kind of like, and your shoulders are going up and down and your chest is going out. But the more you're breathing from your stomach, the more relaxed your speaking will be, and actually the more relaxed you'll feel. So it's a good idea to get into the habit, just even you're lying in your bed, you're sitting watching TV, you're doing whatever you're doing, just get into the habit of putting your hand on your stomach and breathing in and then breathing out. And you'll find the power in it. So let's try. This time what I would like us to do is breathe, take a breath in, and then I'll drop my hand. And when I drop my hand, everybody just goes, ha. And as you go, ha, just let that your stomach shoot in as you're doing it, okay? So are you ready? Breathe in. Ha! And it's got a certain force and it's got a certain projection. So breathing well will help support your voice. Having said that, don't get over anxious about it and start thinking, oh no, I've got to breathe. What am I doing? Your breath will happen naturally. But if you find yourself getting tense and you find yourself panicking or getting nervous, then just taking a moment to slow down and allow. And as you get used to it, what you'll notice is it's not like you're pushing your stomach out. It's all of your body. So your ribs are going out, your back is going out. Everything around here should expand when you breathe in. If any of you are singers, you will have done this a lot because we use that kind of breathing for singing. But it will help with the calmness, and it will help your voice to carry. Because as I said, audibility is important. These days we're often using mics, and I would say if you've got the opportunity to use a mic, use it. It's much easier on your voice, and there are people always in churches who have hearing issues, and they may be reliant on the loop and everything like that. So really don't just go, oh no, everybody can hear me, I don't need a mic. If you can, then use it. It's just helpful for people in general. But it's also good to have the ability to breathe in a relaxed way. One more wee exercise to do for that bit, and that is to limber up our tongues. So anybody got a favorite tongue twister? Oh, that's a difficult one. All right, start with the difficult ones. Red lorry, yellow lorry. So let's start slowly. Red lorry, yellow lorry. 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 I'm losing it already. You'll notice your mouth is moving a lot more than it normally does, doesn't it? That's one of the reasons we do tongue twisters. It's just to loosen everything up so that you're loose and relaxed. Because all of that will help you feel more confident and more comfortable when you're up leading worship. Because when you're up leading worship, what you're trying to do is do it in a way that's relaxing and encouraging to other people. So the more that you feel confident and in control of what you're saying, the better it will be. Okay, so you've got familiar with your voice. You've had a chance to get your voice ready. Now just a few general points about speaking out in general. I think that probably the first important thing to say is not to do with the voice itself, but it's to trust that you actually have something that's worth listening to. Be confident that God has given you something and that you are there to share something with people. So trust that even if it's not perfect, even if it's not polished, even if you make the odd mistake, you've got something that's worth saying and that is worth listening to. So it's always important to start with that. There's a catchphrase I've heard which always makes me laugh, which is, if your sermon is a dog, walk it proudly. And it's the idea of, okay, you've made it up, you stayed up too late, you didn't get this, you messed all Paul's wonderful tips last week for some reason, all went out of your head, you messed it up completely. But if you get up there and you deliver it with sincerity and passion, chances are there's something in there that the Holy Spirit can make use of, and that there is something that will resonate with people. So instead of being all, oh, this is me, this is not really very good, just stand and do it. It's not arrogance, I'm not suggesting that, but just having that feeling that you can and do it. As I said before, you're aiming for audibility, clarity, and expression. Good breath matters. A good stance matters as well. And, that'll be partly what's comfortable with you. Some people, if they stand like I'm standing right now with their feet together, they tip over. So that's helpful. You should also be aware of what your room is. So because this is slightly in the surround, it's kind of useful for me to stand slightly so I can pivot. And that way it's easy to turn for people to be able to follow what you're doing. Do try, if you can, to avoid shuffling. It starts to make your congregation seasick. And a lot of us shuffle when we're nervous, or we shuffle when we're not sure. Again, don't get paranoid about it, but if you have a chance to watch yourself on video and you notice you're weaving a lot, just like grip onto your lectern if you need to for a bit. Wear shoes that keep you in a position. Comfortable shoes, really important if you're standing. Look up when you're presenting, even if you're someone, and Paul mentioned this last week, even if you're someone who likes a full manuscript in front of you, that doesn't mean you can't look out at people. If you're not looking out at people, it's very hard for them to connect, particularly if you're standing up in front of them. And it also helps your voice to carry. If you're actually looking down at notes all the time, your voice is being directed towards the paper that you're looking. So if your chin is up, and not up because that's awkward, but just in a natural position, and you're looking out, that helps, and it makes your point get across. So as Paul was saying last week, things like highlighting keywords in bold, or having your layout's quite important of sermon notes, a way that you can scan and read them quite easily. So if you lose your place, don't panic. If you lose your place, take your time. It's still there. You'll find it. Tone and style. I said at the beginning that I have a carrying voice, but I also have a conversational type of style. And this is sometimes a nightmare for people who are miking me up, because I will vary quite a lot in my volume sometime. So they've got me set for a pitch that works really well until I drop down because I'm being personal and quiet. And then they're like, oh. So I've had to learn to work on that a little bit to make sure that it's not too difficult. What you don't want is somebody up front who is droning on about something, or somebody up front who's lecturing you, because worship service is not a lecture, and it's not a performance. You're there to kind of curate a space, a worship space, and you'll be doing it in lots of different ways, but the kind of tone you set is part of that. I ran into something that I found was an interesting analogy, and it was suggesting that a good language pitch to aim for is the kind of language that you would use when having a cup of coffee with somebody you don't know that well. And I found that kind of interesting, because it was the idea that it was relaxed enough that it's slightly conversational, but it's not like you're just hanging out with a pal. So there's still a certain element of kind of formality in that. So that will depend on your environment, your space, the style of service that you're doing, your personality. But when you use your voice, when you use any aspect of presenting, whether it's signs that you use, whatever it is that you use, your goal is to think widely. Think about the whole room that you're in and ways of reaching them and including them. And that starts actually, not in your voice, it starts in your head. It starts when you get up there with an attitude that you are there to enable, to help facilitate, to bring people along, which makes a real difference. Clarity, as I said, matters. We don't all have to have the same accent, but you might notice that you've got a particular consonant or type of word that you tend to slip on a little bit. Don't turn it into a big bugbear in your head, but just be aware. Some people, particularly working with mics, you might pop your P's a lot or hiss your S's. That's kind of difficult. I've been told sometimes if you turn your S into a Z, It's less likely to hiss. You can give it a try. It might make you sound like you're a snake instead of a snake, but you can give it a try. And you'll vary what you do depending on the circumstances and the space. When I was at Renfield St Stephen's in Glasgow, we had worship in the round, so there were circles all around you. So the congregation was all around, which I loved because I just like the feeling of being in the middle of things rather than up front. But you had to be able to speak this way and make sure that the people who were actually behind you could still hear. So there are things to kind of think about there. If you're live streaming, as a lot of us are these days, remember there's a camera there. Don't fixate on it, but know where it is so that if you do wish to say something, if I'm asking my congregation something, we do, quite a bit of little participation bits in our services. My congregation's usually pretty good at getting along with it if I ask them to do something. And I'll try and include people online. So our camera tends to be up there. So I will just give it a glance and say, and if you're joining us online, make sure you do that too. One of the things that is missed in a way about the stage when in the pandemic, when we were doing very personal to camera stuff, is it was very direct for everybody. And that was quite nice for some people from home because they got everything directly to them. Now we're back in a circumstance where people are, at least at the West, where people are watching something that's also going on live. So you want to do what you can to include people at home and make sure that they also feel that they're part of it. I said, don't obsess about where the camera is, but know where it is so that you're ready to use it. And finally, before we take a little bit of a break, nerves are okay. It's all right to be nervous. In fact, nerves can actually help. It gives you a little bit of adrenaline. Just watch the effect that adrenaline has on speed. It can make you speak very quickly, which is hard for people. You might discover your hour-long service takes 45 minutes because you've spoken so quickly. When I first did a reading in church when I was about 11 or 12, I think, my youth group leader printed the word "slow down" in a large print on the lectern so that I would not try and read it at the speed of light, which was actually very helpful. So, but it's okay to be nervous. That, to some extent, means you care and you're paying attention. What you don't want to be is so nervous that you're paralyzed by it. So, doing what you need to do to relax. Emotions are also okay. And this is something important. Some of you will be involved in leading funerals. Sometimes you'll be dealing with sensitive subjects on a Sunday. It's okay to show your own emotion. I know many of us are Northeasterners and it's like, ooh, can't do that, can't show emotion. But actually, it's okay, and it's actually sometimes helpful. It doesn't mean you break down because your job is to help the people in the service, so you are trying to hold yourself together. But it is okay to express some emotion, whatever that may be. One of the, I remember a minister I worked with in the past saying at a funeral that tears are never a problem. If it makes you cry, cry. Just try and keep your voice steady. And again, that comes back to the breathing, because the steadiness of your voice will help the folks in the congregation who are trying to monitor their emotions. And his advice, which I found very helpful, was if the emotional temperature is getting really high, if you've got somebody who's really breaking down, speak a little bit more slowly and actually a little bit quieter. Don't try and go over the volume of somebody who's getting upset, because if you are calm and you are steady and you are slow, that actually helps other people. It gives them, it's like something for them to hook onto, something for them to be part of. But never be ashamed if something makes you cry in a service. You might be like me, who cries quite easily, especially when something moves me. Laughing at your own jokes too much, you may have to watch that a little bit. Getting so angry about something that you're shouting is maybe not. But again, if you're speaking about a social justice issue that you feel passionate about, don't speak about it in a bland, yes, well, we all need to do it. Just speak it out and say, this is not acceptable. Because people warm to that. People respond to that if you are honest and real, not trying to be deliberately dramatic, just trying to be yourself. Right. My voice could use a break now. So we're going to take our comfort break now for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to come back. I'm going to give you a few specific pointers to do, which are summarized on your sheets, but to do with specific elements like doing reading or prayers. And then we should have 20 minutes or so at the end for our Q&A. So take 10 minutes, go to the loo, stretch your legs, get fresh air, whatever you need. But do try and make it only 10 minutes, please, if possible. So that would be back by 5 past. So, okay, so a few specific pointers. One thing I meant to mention when we were talking about resonance or talking about projection there is never think of your voice as coming from your throat. Your voice passes through your throat, but it actually starts down here and it comes out through your head and through your chest. So a little bit of visualization. When you want to get louder, think of your voice coming out of your head or coming out of your chest, and don't strain your throat because that just makes it harder. So a few specific pointers that we'll go through. So first thing I was thinking about was reading. Probably a lot of you have read readings in church because that's often the way that people start something to get up and do it, but there's still a few things to remember. One is that unless you're a very good sight reader, and some of us are through practice or whatever, if you're not an instinctive sight reader, don't come to the reading cold. Make sure you've read it beforehand. It sounds obvious, but just make sure. And ideally, don't just read it once. Maybe read it through a few times. Apart from anything else, you should understand what you're reading. So read it through a few times. Read it out loud if possible, just to get the feeling for the kind of the rhythm and the speed of it is quite good practice before you do it. If your worship leader has been really cruel to you, or you've been really cruel to yourself and has given you one of those passages with 18 names that you can't pronounce, just make it up, I should say, to a certain extent. You might be the kind of person who wants to delve down and Google and try and find the exact pronunciation and then stress all night about whether you're going to get it right. Generally speaking, most people are not going to know how it's pronounced. And do remember, we're talking about ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek, neither of which are languages spoken these days, so who knows exactly how it was pronounced anyway. So, but just get comfortable with how you want to say it. And if the way you say it is different from the way the minister says it 2 minutes later when they're doing the sermon, don't panic and spend the rest of the sermon going, I got it wrong, I got it wrong, I got it wrong. Doesn't matter, really doesn't. Just don't worry about it, but for your own confidence, it doesn't hurt to just check. You are reading for meaning and expression. That's the point of a reading, is you're sharing the word of God. So try not to think about too much about whether you're not trying to sound holy. You're not trying to sound that this is now a Bible reading, so I'm going to read it in this terribly different way. Think about what the Bible reading is saying and read it accordingly. And what can be quite helpful in that way is to be aware that different readings might have different styles. So, if you're reading a parable of Jesus and he's telling it in a storytelling style, think about the way you use your voice when you're telling a story and tell it that way. If the passage has dialogue in it and different people are speaking, think of the way that people speak. And that sounds slightly different than the kind of narration bits. Again, not being artificial, just thinking about how you would say that. If it's a passage of, you've got a complicated bit of theology, take it a little bit slower. It's going to, if you've got, sort of something about the cosmic Christ, and all the rest and everything, and, Paul's giving out some long, complicated bit of theology, slow down. And take your time, because the congregation's going to need time as well to absorb it. If they've got a Bible, if they've got the words up front, that might help them a little bit, but they're still going to need a bit of time. So if it's a theological kind of piece, take a little bit of time with it. If it's Paul's more personal stuff, a letter, think about writing letters. Think about the kind of tone that comes across when you're writing a letter. When Paul says words like beloved, that's an affectionate word. So feel free to say it in an affectionate way. Let it flow naturally. On the other hand, if you're reading the Psalms or you're reading some revelation from vision, think of poetry, think of rhythm, think of pace, think of giving people time to absorb the word pictures that you're painting, the kind of awe and wonder or the deep emotional content of the psalm. So don't approach every reading the same way. You don't have to overanalyze it and make a million notes. just use your instincts and think, how does this passage come across? I have a little pet peeve with some Bible publications, and you get this with online ones, that have subtitles in them, which are editions of the editors. They're not, like they'll say, Jesus speaks to the 5,000. That's not in the Bible. That's an editor wanting to put in Jesus speaks to the 5,000. Normally, things flow better if you don't include those subtitles. So if you're copying and pasting from Bible Gateway or something, those aren't needed. And don't get fixated on verse numbers. The verse numbers, again, are put in by editors, although they're more ancient than the subtitles. Let the reading flow the way it flows. So if a sentence runs on in a particular way, you don't need to pause because it's the end of a verse or whatever. Pay attention to the punctuation. It can help you remember to breathe, but don't be too dominated by it. So otherwise, just get up, take your time, breathe, have a little run through beforehand, and read it. Read it clearly, and that's all really that's required. Preaching. I'm not going to say too much about this because Paul was saying it quite a bit last week, which was very helpful. But I would say don't have a preaching voice. You don't have to start sounding different just because you're preaching. I was very tempted to play for you, and I would encourage anybody who wishes to look this up. An old sketch by the Beyond the Fringe sketch group from the 60s. And in this case, it's Alan Bennett. And the sketch is called Take a Pew, if you want to search for it on Google. And it's basically a minister droning on with a sermon that goes absolutely nowhere. And it starts with him saying, "But my brother Esau is an hairy man, but I am a smooth man." And that's his text. And then he goes on and on and on and uses all those kind of tropes that you hear a certain kind of generation of minister tending to do. I was at a thinking day service with my daughter when she was a teenager, and we were sitting there in the service, and the minister got up to give his sermon as part of the service. And although he was from Kilmarnock, he wasn't from the north of England like Alan Bennett, there was something in his tone of voice that I could tell Sarah was thinking the same thing I was. And we couldn't look at each other because we were about to burst into laughter because he just sounded, his phrasing was exactly the same. So if you want to know how not to do it, but it's also very, very funny. So worth looking up, Take a Pew. Repetition, dynamics, varying your volume and speed, that all adds kind of texture and warmth to your preaching. Don't let it take away from what you're saying, but just let it flow, let it enhance what you've got there. As Paul said last week, write as you speak. If you're somebody who writes your sermons, you are writing in a spoken style, the way you would speak. So the kind of things, the kind of repetitions that you use, the kind of way that you speak tends to be shorter sentences, tends to be a little bit more natural. Often if you look up things like blogs, when people write blogs, they often write in a more speech type of style. So just worth bearing that in mind. And as somebody was saying earlier, don't be afraid to pause, even in the middle of a sermon. People might need time to catch up. Pauses are never a bad thing. So don't be afraid to take pauses and stop when you need to. Little word about prayer. So you might be someone who tends to use a prepared prayer, something that you've written down. Or you might be somebody who likes to pray what they talk about as extemporary prayer, which means prayer that you create or make up as you go. There's no right or wrong to this. Both are good ways of praying. When reading a prepared prayer, it's good to, again, don't just read it all out in one. Think of it as kind of you're creating a word picture for people. There's a kind of poetic element to prayer. You're wanting people to inhabit this prayer space that you're creating. So again, just take your time with it and allow that to flow. You might find you're a little bit more measured in your prayer than you are like in your children's chat, but it doesn't mean you're actually putting on your holy prayer voice. It's still a conversation. It's just you're having a conversation with God, and you are inviting, because it's corporate prayer, other people into that conversation. One tip if you are putting in a deliberate pause, let's say you're asking people to pray something in their own heads, think of a name, or take a pause for meditation, is always hold the pause just a little bit longer than you feel comfortable with. So when you start to feel uncomfortable, wait a little bit. Because chances are, since you're up front, you're probably feeling uncomfortable before anybody else is. So the right length is probably a little bit longer than you think it is. I say that with a certain caution. There may be some of you who'd be quite happy to stand up and be silent for 5 minutes, in which case your congregation might get a little edgy if you haven't prepared them for it. But generally speaking, it's good. Some people are just going to hold on to a phrase in your prayer, and that's all they'll remember. And maybe that's all they need to remember. Or they won't remember the words at all. They'll just remember the feeling and the emotion that was evoked, and that is what matters. If you're doing extemporary prayer, just praying off the cuff, so to speak, again, no right and wrong way to do it. We do tend to fall into certain habits. It's not a bad idea, if you're planning to pray that way or expecting to pray that way, to just think a little bit beforehand about what the purpose of your prayer is and what you might want to say. So is it going to be a prayer where you're thanking God? Is it going to be a prayer where you're asking for help? Anne Lamott, American writer, has a book called Help, Sorry, Wow, which is her way of thinking of prayer. You're actually asking for help, you're saying sorry, or you're going wow. So, something like that can be a little thing to just remember. Think, what's my prayer supposed to be about? What kind of things do I want to pray for? And if you find yourself feeling stuck or repetitive, pause. The people that you are leading in prayer are happy to take that time and to pause. So don't feel you have to fill every second of the prayer. Sometimes people get repetitive because they're trying to fill the gaps. They're uncomfortable with the silence. But we get very wordy in church, and a lot of people appreciate silence. There's nothing wrong with having a bit of silence. One or two tips, and again, these are summarized here. One or two tips about recording. Think about where you're standing in terms of the camera. You see so many people on Zoom or on YouTube who've got the camera down here and it's looking up your nostrils or distorting the picture. Just have a look beforehand if you're recording as to where can you be seen. Can you be heard? Check your sound. Just make sure. It may sound good to you, but it may not be coming across. So get your tech person to check your sound. Watch background noise. It's fabulous having things recorded outside. It can be very difficult unless your mic is really good. Phone cameras these days are quite good, and the mics are quite good for recording stuff to listen to yourself. But if you're trying to record something to screen, you've got to watch the background noise unless you've got a good mic and a good setup. So just check that kind of stuff. Speak to the camera directly, but don't be intimidated by it. Imagine the camera is a person that you're talking to, and just talk to the camera as if it is a person. It is representing your whole congregation. Don't shy away from it, but don't get fixated on it either. When we talk to people, we look, but we also look away and we think and we pause, so just think of it as some unintimidating person in your life or someone in your congregation that is an encourager. I remember in my old home congregation, there was a retired minister who was the best person in the world to look at when you were preaching or leading, because he always looked encouraging. Always. He just looked like he was really interested in what I was saying and just engaged, and it was fabulous. And he also had this wonderful habit. When he got up to preach himself, he was an elderly man by this time, he would take in this really deep breath and breathe out. And when I first heard him preach, I was kind of like, for goodness sake, why is he taking so long to get started? And then it got to a point where it was something I kind of looked forward to, because this sense of and going in, it was just really lovely. And I discovered, George Campbell was his name, I discovered speaking to George afterwards that for him, that was inhaling the Holy Spirit before he started to preach the word. So he would always consciously and deliberately take a moment and inhale the Holy Spirit and then exhale, as in just, exhaling this sharing the sense of God and the presence of God. And I just thought, fabulous. So if you've got people like that around, they're absolute treasures, so do hold on to them. So really, those are the only kind of specific pointers that I want to give, although we're happy to answer questions in the question section about the public speaking as well as everything else. But one final thing I do just want to say is a little bit about what you do when things go wrong. Because in public speaking, that's often one of the things that we worry about. What do you do when things go wrong? So the first thing I would say, to quote Douglas Adams and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, don't panic. Okay? And as the book says, in large friendly letters on the cover. So the first thing when things go wrong is don't panic, because things do go wrong. It happens. You can be as perfectly prepared in the world, and things can just not happen. It happens. Some of you may have seen the play that goes wrong. I remember seeing it when it was at His Majesty's in Aberdeen, and it can be really comical when you see these things happening, and people are just dealing with it. But in a similar way, most congregations don't actually mind things going wrong, particularly if you don't mind things going wrong. They take their lead from you. And if you are relaxed about it, or appear to be relaxed about it, because sometimes it's a bit of a swan situation, underneath you're going, when is this recording going to start? But if you appear to be relaxed, the congregation feels more comfortable too. And they will be more relaxed. And actually, it can even be a bonding experience with the congregation. It's part of what humanizes it. It's part of what takes it away from being a performance that has to be all perfect to being a shared experience. Just the idea that things go wrong. I remember my minister in communion knocking over the entire goblet of wine all over the communion table. Your spotless white communion, and there's this kind of gasp. Oh, it's communion, this is a sacrament. He burst out laughing, made a joke about it, all of the rest and everything. Everybody else relaxed. Nobody minded. We got it all tidied up. We got more wine poured in. We were grateful we weren't Episcopalians and, had to sort of lick off the tablecloth or inhale it, that we could be sort of more casual about it. But it helped. It created this sense. Often people will say when a mistake happens, oh, it's okay, nobody noticed. And sometimes, that's not true, because it was maybe something really large that nobody noticed, like you're announcing a video that never starts. Yes, of course, people are going to notice that. But honestly, most of the time, nobody minds, and it can be a bonding experience. Congregations like to feel that they're in safe hands. It's the same way, if you go to a stand-up comedy thing, if the comedian is confident, the audience relaxes. If the comedian looks really nervous, as opposed to a kiddie on nervous, if they look really nervous, the audience can get more unsettled. It's not a performance when you are up leading worship, but you are helping to set the tone. And if you appear comfortable, then the congregation feels comfortable, and they're okay with things going wrong. Doesn't mean you're going to be arrogant, but just have a little bit of security and confidence in what you're doing, and fess up when something happens that doesn't work. And don't make the people, if it's not you that messed up, if it's somebody else that messed up, don't make them feel bad. It's not their fault either. The long-serving people on the sound desk, or your musicians, or your, whoever else is doing it. Don't spotlight them and say, oh, Jeannie over there always does that. That's not what you're there for. Take the hit yourself if you need to, but just help people to feel relaxed with it. Having said that, for your own peace of mind, not a bad idea to have a plan B. Just in your head, particularly if you're dealing with technology. So if you've got this whole whiz-bang thing planned and it doesn't happen, then just have a little think about, okay, so what am I going to do if it doesn't happen? And I want to finish, before we have our Q&A, with one story, which was an example of me learning that lesson. And that is, I was doing a service in my home church. It was before I started training for ministry, but I was involved in leading worship. And I was covering for the minister who was away, so I was doing the whole service. It was a summer service, and we didn't print orders of service at that stage. I'd done everything. I had my manuscript, everything all written up. My printer started to give me problems on the Saturday night, and it was running low on ink. So I thought, that's okay. I've got a new cartridge. I'll put it in the morning. So I put the new cartridge in the morning. For some reason, it didn't work. But I did all this fiddling about with it. Eventually, I got this pale wash of notes. My prayers, my children's chat, my sermon, everything, all but, pale, readable, just. Dashed down. By this time, I arrive at the church with, 3 or 4 minutes to spare. quickly tell the folks on the tech side that we're not having anything fancy or technical, but can I at least take a note of the order of service? Because I didn't even have that printed out. Get up into the pulpit, ready to speak, ready to look down. In the light in the church, I couldn't see a thing. Not a single thing. So I prayed. I prayed very, very hard, and I did the entire service without even a bullet point. Now, that's not saying to brag. I'm somebody who still likes to have things written out, so this is not, oh, aren't I wonderful, I do this. But because I had worked on it, it was already in my head, the gist of it. And because the Holy Spirit was covering me, as I swear the Holy Spirit was, it was fine. And the service was exactly an hour long, even though I had no watch and I had no timing, and all the elements fell into place. And several people afterwards, like, oh, I really enjoyed that, you know. And I'm like, great, thank you. I have no idea what I just said. When I was doing the sermon, I felt like, you know, you're in a tunnel and the words disappear. I felt like as soon as I'd said something, it was gone. It was away. I had no idea what it was, or whether it made any sense. Could have been gobbledygook. But it worked. And it was good because it made me realize, do you know what? That can happen. And you can still have a worship experience with people, you know? You can still, doesn't mean you take it for granted and you just pitch up without doing the work. That's not what it's about. But things can go wrong, things will go wrong, but it's not the end of the world. Most congregations are grateful that you're willing to be up there and leading it, and it's not them having to do it. So just appreciate that, believe in what you're doing, and enjoy it. So yeah, that's it for public speaking. We'll move on to Q&A.